I would say it's great to see you, but I can't see you. But I can see our two alums who are going to take part in today's conversation, Steve Werber and Duncan Van Dusen. Thank you guys for being with us today. And Duncan, I'm looking forward. I haven't had a chance yet to read your book, When We're Going to Teach Health, but I'm sure I'm going to be inspired after this one to read it. I know it's available on Amazon and other outlets. And Susan McLean from our office will be sharing those links after the webinar. I also want to thank Susan and her team at SYA for organizing not only this webinar today, but several that we've done over the course of the pandemic. And they've done a great job behind the scenes to make all this work. And if you haven't had a chance, we've been doing seminars with resident directors and faculty, mainly around our first ever capital campaign, our comprehensive capital campaign. And you can find those links on YouTube, and I hope you're able to do that. Before I introduce today's moderator, Steve, I do want to take a moment because I get a lot of questions right now about how things are at SYA. As most of you know from what I've communicated, we tried very hard at least to run a second semester program, but the pandemic was raging so much that we really couldn't send our students over safely. So sadly, we do not have students overseas this year. We do, however, have brought back our faculty, our local faculty, to do some work this December through spring. They're going to prepare for next year. They are also going to connect with some of our member schools and do some units for students over here who are probably Zoomed to the max. They are also going to be doing some work with alumni. So that's just a little tease. I know Susan will be getting information out about that. We're organizing that right now. So you'll get to do some refresher courses with some of your favorite faculty. So look for that information coming out. And the other thing I would say before, again, introducing Steve, the help that you can do not only to support us in the capital campaign, but to find students for us. And your words mean a lot to parents and students, and you plant the seed now. Sometimes it sprouts immediately. Other times it may take a few years for a student to say, that's what I want to do. So please spread the word for us, and we thank you for those efforts. So today I want to introduce Steve Werber, who's France class of 1983. He is currently working at Brown Brothers Harriman and Company. Before that, he spent a lot of time using his French that he fostered in Rennes and beyond in the work world. Right now he's also on the board of Kids on Point, which is a nonprofit based in Charleston, South Carolina, where he and his family live. And that is a really interesting program because it helps kids improve their school attendance, their academic performance, and their likelihood of achieving higher ed, which makes Steve's moderating this conversation today really important and helpful. And I want to thank Steve. He's been an incredible volunteer for us, not only on the campaign cabinet steering committee, but has been chair of the Philanthropy Council. And he found his way many years ago, well, just a few years ago, Steve, to SYA through the Episcopal School in Jacksonville, Florida. And then after that, he went on to UVA and then Kellogg School of Management. And Steve and his wife, Carolyn, are again residing in South Carolina with their 5 children, and maybe one of those will head our way. So thank you, Steve. I'm going to turn it over to you. And again, thank you both, Steve and Duncan.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tom. So thanks everyone for joining. And I have read the book. I was really excited when I got into it because, as Tom mentioned, I'm on the board of Kids on Point, and we're firm believers that healthy children with healthy diets is just a much better starting place to absorb the program that we're trying to teach them, that revolves around education, sports, and teaching them how to be successful adults, hopefully matriculating into higher education. And so I think there's a few people hopefully today from Kids on Point as well, and I think, Duncan, when you and I were chatting, you have some familiarity with the Squash Education Alliance, of which Kids on Point is a part. So I think it was random that I was chosen to do this, but I think there was fate as well, because it's a topic near and dear to my heart. And I'm sure during the discussion, we'll get into some other topics in the book that I found very interesting. So let me just introduce Duncan, and then we're going to give Duncan a chance to kind of level set the topic for us with a few slides, and then we're going to get into some Q&A. So Duncan is an alumnus from SYA France of '87, so 4 years after me, and he's a parent of an SYAer. So his daughter, Kate, was in the SYA summer program in Spain in 2017. Obviously had a good experience because she went on to China for a year in 2019. Duncan is a social entrepreneur who started and built successful for-profit and nonprofit organizations. So he's the founder and CEO of Catch Global Foundation, whose mission is to connect underserved schools and communities with resources to create and sustain health for future generations. And Catch now serves 11,000 schools and educational sites and reaches over 2.5 million children annually in the US and Latin America with its programs. Duncan was previously founder and CEO of Tango Health and Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing for AtWorks, a financial software company whose growth led to a strategic acquisition by Bank of America. So he's pursued his passion for children's rights through publishing scientific studies on links between fitness and academic achievement, volunteering with CASA, and an advocate for child welfare, and making the case for health education in K-12 schools. Duncan attended SYA as a junior from founding school, St. Paul's School in Concord, and holds a bachelor's degree from Princeton University and a master's in public health from the University of Texas. He speaks fluent French and mediocre Spanish, and outside of work, Duncan has volunteered on behalf of SYA and spends time enjoying the great outdoors with his family and experimenting with novel communication strategies to convince his own daughters to stay sun safe, exercise, and eat their vegetables. We are alike in that effort. So, you know, just a plug for SYA, another SYA alum doing such interesting and meaningful work. And, you know, one of the reasons I love being engaged and staying engaged with SYA is to meet people like Duncan. So, Duncan, thanks for being here. And I'm going to turn over to you. And unless you have anything else to say, I'll let you, also proceed to slides for a few minutes.
Okay, super. Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you everybody for joining. Let me know if you can see my screen okay. I'm trying to pull up can you see the presentation entitled, If Not Now, When?
Yes. No
okay.
Content outside of that.
Yeah, there's no content up there. There's no content up there.
Okay.
So, but there's about to be. And, I'd like to prove that first of all, I'd like to prove that I can work French literature into any conversation. Because I was trained at SYA France, and and many of you have probably read Victor Hugo either in French or in English. And one of my favorite things that he said is, stronger than invading armies is the power of an idea whose time has come. And it seems to me that prioritizing teaching health in K-12 schools is an idea whose time has finally come. When we look at the twin crises of youth vaping and COVID, which even a few years ago, neither of which existed or was in our mindset at all, look at where we are. Look at the impact that health has had on the lives of our children. And look at how when our children aren't healthy, they can't learn. They can't even go to school. This is a huge issue, and it builds. I think it puts a crisis, a quick-moving crisis, on top of what was previously a slow-moving crisis with things like childhood obesity and diabetes and cancer and so on. So, I almost published this book a year ago, in about January of 2020. And thank God thank goodness I had a friend who said, I think that you should add some more case studies in and expand it a little bit, because I think you really got something here. And then of course, COVID hit, which provided a whole new angle and a whole new impetus and urgency for the conversation. And also provide the inspiration for the title. Because if after what we've seen with the vaping crisis, what we've seen with the COVID crisis, if we don't think that now it's time to prioritize health, then when are we going to start teaching health? So there's really four reasons that I wrote the book, and there's four things that I hope that my readers will remember, whether they're professional educators or part-time educators, also known as parents, although many of them have become full-time educators against their better wishes recently, or just concerned citizens. I think there's really four key reasons why it's critical that schools prioritize health. The first benefit of health is health. So if you're healthy, you can keep that for a long time. And the World Health Organization has a benchmark statistic called healthy life expectancy, which really is not just the number of years you live, but it's the number of healthy years you live. So if you live an entire year at a kind of half health, then that counts as 0.5. And in the United States in 2016, which is the most recent data we had, in the United States, when you're born, you had an average expectancy, healthy life expectancy of 68.5. And note, this is lower than the full life expectancy of, say, 74, because again, some of those years are not fully healthy. So 68.5 years at birth. And that puts us in a tie for 42nd with Poland. The lowest, we are the lowest among the 30 most economically developed countries. And worse, we're heading in the wrong direction. In the 6 previous years, the healthy average life expectancy declined in only 4 countries in the entire world. The other 3, Iraq, Libya, and Syria, all endured deadly civil wars during that period. So we're keeping very, very poor company when it comes to our healthy average life expectancy and the direction in which our healthy average life expectancy is going. Now, this is a big picture, long-term problem, and it's often something that's very hard for anyone to do about, particularly schools who have much more immediate concerns. So we need to keep it in the background, but it's also not in and of itself enough of a message to schools for why they should do something about it. But fortunately, there are a couple of other messages which are more in the wheelhouse of schools. And the next one is that there's a very important short-term benefit to health too, and that's being a better learner. Okay, so this is a slide from a paper I wrote when I was in graduate school and got into this whole world on associations between cardiovascular fitness and academic performance, which we use the Texas, at that time it was the TACS, now STAR test that's administered to all public school students in the state of Texas. And you see what epidemiologists call a dose-response correlation here. Each unit of cardiovascular fitness that you add returns a unit of academic performance on the TACS. And this is very, very powerful for an educator, because what this shows an educator is, I don't have to wait 68.5 years to see the benefit of health. We can see that this year, or even this week, or this afternoon. There's an increasing amount of research that shows when you activate kids' brains, they perform better right now. So the benefit of health is short-term, sometimes exceedingly short-term, and this is something that is attracting the attention of an increasing number of educators to the point that many are starting to believe that if they're not paying attention to health in their own schools, that they're working to their own detriment because it's a crucial part of learning. The third reason is, so we've talked about, kind of the headstrings, if you will, in terms of the logic of why health should be part of schools. There's also the heartstrings, which is the social benefit of health. And with this graph, which is from my book, and is part of a case study on a school called Ortiz Elementary, which is down in the valley in the South Texas, very South Texas. We're talking like less than a mile from the border with Mexico. So what this graph shows is that throughout the entire state of Texas, as schools' economic status is lower, or their financial insecurity is higher, let's say, that their academic performance is lower. Okay, so this is a terribly sad truth that the lower income schools perform less well. This is part of a package of economic disparities, health disparities, educational disparities that tend to travel together. But look at Ortiz Elementary up there. They have 92.5% of their kids eligible for the free and reduced lunch program, which is a kind of benchmark measure of poverty. And yet, they were able to have a perfect 4.0 rating from the Texas Education Agency in terms of the indicators of school performance, academic performance specifically. Why is that? Well, if you ask the principal, she says it's because of health. It's because we prioritize the whole child and the needs of the whole child, including having sound body, sound mind, sound immune system, sound spirit. And that's their culture. That's what they live by, and they have the data to prove it. They're in a very, very elite company of people who've gotten away from this horrible kind of red line that slides down the middle. So when you look at it through that lens, health is really a way potentially to buck some of the inequitable trends in our society that pair low economic status, low educational status, and low health status. So that's, the first two reasons are kind of the head, and the third reason is kind of the heart. And the fourth reason really is the hands. And this in some ways is the best reason of all, which is kids want health. Schools are there for the kids. And health is something that kids respond to, is something that they feel is valuable. We started about 4 years ago this vaping prevention program called Catch My Breath, which has gotten to be very successful, reaches over 1 million kids a year, and it has all kinds of wonderful scientific outcomes that are written up in scientific journals about how it lowers the initiation of vaping and it increases the kids' positive attitudes about avoiding vaping and lowers their susceptibility, et cetera, et cetera. But one of my favorite statistics from all the research that we've done on Catch My Breath is we ask kids who take the program, well, do you think that everybody, all the kids in your school, should do this? And 82% say yes. All middle and high schoolers like me should get the Catch My Breath program. I don't know if anyone's ever done any exit surveys on the US history class that ask kids, should everybody in the school be required to study US history? And if they did do that survey, my guess is that the figure would be a heck of a lot lower than 82%. So this is very powerful. And the other thing that we found in our work with Catch is health can be fun. And when it's fun, it gets done. And look at those happy faces there in their Catch t-shirts doing a fun run. This is kids. Adults think of health as a chore to a large degree sometimes. I mean, we know it's good for us, but it's a pain, right? To work out, eat healthy, and so on. Kids are naturals when it comes to health. They love it. They want to be healthy. They want to see the people around them be healthy. And in many ways, they become, the best health ambassadors of all once you get them going in it. So this is a very important, part of the reason why schools should be promoting health. And it connects obviously to, one of our themes for today, which is adolescent empowerment, youth empowerment. So health education can be a very, very important part of empowering youth. And as I say in the book, the best way to learn is to teach. And the best way to believe is to evangelize. So when we get kids helping teach other kids about health, helping teach their parents about health, evangelizing, for health in however they do it in their communities or in their churches or in their families, then kids internalize the health behaviors and they, they live them. So on the left, you can see there a photograph from our Catch My Breath service learning project. So there's a guy who's doing a lesson on vaping prevention to a classroom of his peers. On the right, you can see a bunch of kids in El Paso, Texas, who are painting, with sidewalk chalk, painting pictures of fruits and vegetables, and they got a football there and so on. So they're essentially making, art, health art. And they're enjoying it, and they're coming up with names for the different fruits and vegetables. There's actually research that shows that if you come up with exciting, developmentally age appropriate names, it can increase kids' consumption of fruits and vegetables, which is pretty remarkable. So that's those are the points that I wanted to provide as background in terms of why I felt it was important to write the book, what the key benefits are to educators, again, whether they're full-time educators or parents or whomever, anyone who's responsible for the growth and development of children should really ask themselves, when are we going to teach these kids about health? And who's going to do that teaching? Because if the schools aren't doing it and they're not doing it now, when are we planning to do it? So with that, let me stop the screen share and we'll just go into, I think more of an open discussion.
Yeah, that was great. One of the things I found interesting about the book, I was, into the first chapter, very interested, and I was thinking that this was going to be advocating for some top-down solutions, but in fact, your modus operandi seems very bottom-up. So I'm wondering if you can kind of maybe talk a little bit about a couple of case studies and how you got parents in the community members to support health in the schools. And I think, for me as a parent, and maybe for others on this webinar, I think it'd be interesting to hear that approach versus a more top-down, you must do this.
Yeah, great question. Well, the educational system in the US is very, very distributed, right? We've got federal funding, we've got some state standards and oversight, and then we have, for most of the country, independent school districts, which can have anywhere from a couple of schools all the way up to, several hundred, or the largest school district is New York, has over 1,000 schools. And then you have the individual kind of campus level. And so it's very easy for any actor to say, well, look, it's really not our decision, right? I mean, that's true. The federal government level is just true at all the levels. We can't decide if we should or shouldn't be doing health. So I think that that's easy in a way to cop out and say, well, it's not up to me to prioritize this. I just, on the other hand, it's possible to look at that decentralization in a very positive way and say that everybody can do something, right? Because the power is so distributed. And so, when we talk to schools and they say, well, gee, I really like this idea, but what could we do? How do we do it? There are techniques, there are ways, and we talk about some of them in the book, and that's kind of what Catch does. And a lot of, here's one way to look at it. If you want to use Zoom, you can get the free plan. And you can get 90-minute meetings with however many people, and there's some, it's limited, but you can get something for free. And I think that's an interesting way of looking at health. There are things we can do with the time and money that we already have. Simple things. If you're a principal and on your desk in your office, you have a giant bowl of candy, what message is that communicating to kids? If you yourself are not practicing healthy habits, if you don't even eat lunch with the kids, if your physical educator hasn't gotten to go to any kind of professional development in 5 years, these are all things that you don't need the federal government to allow you to take the candy bowl off your desk. You can just do that. So, and there's many examples of that, food policy within schools, using food as a reward. I mean, there's many schools in the country, sadly, that still use food as a reward. Using PE as a form of discipline. I mean, in many states, it's actually illegal. It's considered corporal punishment. And yet many schools still do use PE. Either they withhold it as a discipline, or they require it as a discipline. You got to do extra push-ups, got to do extra laps. So there are some and some of those may sound obvious, but you'd be surprised at how many schools do some of those basic things. So the first question that, I would ask any school is, what can we do for free? What can we do without having permission from somebody else? Let's do that now. And then, someday we hopefully can advocate for more resources to buy up to the pro plan or the enterprise plan or whatever, and we can get, more features and functions and more value. And as far as parents go, what I would say is, more than anything, there's strength in numbers. And we saw this big time when we started doing the vaping prevention program. We would hold informational assemblies, because one of the problems we had with vaping was the parents just didn't know. They didn't know the vocabulary. They didn't know what the devices looked like. They're like, I've heard about this thing, but tell me, what the heck is this? And why is my kid behaving strangely? And so we held informational sessions at local schools and then, you know, statewide and nationwide, to just inform parents. And I told the school, before we'd have these sessions, we would tell the school administrators, number one, you need to be there. This is not just between us and the parents. And number two, basically bring your body armor, because the parents who are going to show up at this, they're going to want to know what the school is doing. And when you put them all in a room together and they start asking questions, what is the school doing disciplinary wise? What are they doing surveillance wise? How is the school educating the kids about the dangers of vaping? The school better have some good answers. And so we saw a number of schools who ended up adopting a more serious approach to health education because of the pressure from parents that came from these informational assemblies. So just attending them and asking the hard questions really did have some impact.
What, you know, I think many of us might have faced this on the call or be concerned about it. You know, what do you think parents can tell their kids or ask their kids about vaping? How do you think that a parent should approach the vaping issue, which, you know, did just sort of come out of nowhere and just appeared almost like the coronavirus, you know, a few years ago, and it became just such a broad issue. But what advice or thoughts do you have around that?
Yeah, well, I'm glad I'm glad you framed it as tell or ask, because people do ask me all the time, you know, what should I tell my kids? And I say it's not what you tell your kids, it's what you ask your kids. You know, for a lot of parents, an easy way to get into it is, you know, you can kind of play dumb and say, well, what is vaping? And how does that work? And what are in those things? I mean, see how much your kids actually know about it, because for one, it's an interesting way for you to learn about it. And for two, you may find that kids don't really know that much, or what they know is incorrect. I mean, for example, we did surveys that showed that over a third of kids thought that the primary ingredient in the vape was water vapor, which is easy to think because of the name vaping, but it's actually zero. There's no water in the so-called e-juice at all. And there's a little bit of water in what you exhale, because you're always exhaling some amount of water vapor. But, you know, that was a very common myth. We had you know, over a quarter of kids who thought that if a e-cigarette had a flavor, that it didn't have any nicotine. Also, you know, terrible myth and misperception. So starting the conversation by asking questions rather than making declarative statements is much more empowering for kids. It's essentially, you know, it's the Socratic method. It's what I'd recommend for parents. It's what I recommend for teachers. Lead them down the path to try to, and then you get into questions like, well, what does vaping do to your lungs? How does that affect your lung health? And you want to be soccer captain, right? You have to run a lot in soccer, and that's, so you need, I mean, is lung health important to soccer? You know, having kids are ambitious. They have goals. Having kids understand the alignment, the relationship between their goals and their health behaviors is huge. And actually, one of the strides that we've really made in vaping prevention is getting advocates within the community of student athletes, because that's exactly what they're saying. I mean, lung health is not a topic that kids used to talk about at all. It is a topic that kids used to talk about now, partly because of the education around the vaping crisis. This vaping is harming your lung health, and harming your lung health is going to harm your athletic performance. Yeah. Simple as that. Yeah. And now we have an additional thing, which is harming your lung health is going to make you more susceptible to COVID. One of the disappointments of my book, although I could also frame it as, you know, impetus for a second edition, is literally the day after I submitted my final draft, we got the first paper came out about the correlations between vaping and COVID. And I said in the book, you know, we strongly suspect that there's a correlation, and it turned out the first paper on it came out the very next day. So there's always more news.
Yeah. Okay. And we might discuss that further if there are any additional questions around that. One of the anecdotes, though, I wanted to bring out before I forget, when we were talking about, you know, sort of the bottom up. One of the things a few things that stood out for me was, one, your suggestion, or that I think some of the schools you work with, they have like a fun run. So especially in the elementary level, and just the kids, I know my kids did that at their schools, and they absolutely love it. It gets them into running. It's very social. The whole school's involved, including teachers and administrators, and parents can run too. So it's a real community thing. The other thing that you pointed out, which I think was a really good point, I just want to sort of note it, is you said, there's health in math, or vice versa. There's math and health, and there's science and health. And so why not kind of integrate some health into your science class? There doesn't have to be a separate health course. You can kind of,
right.
You can teach health through some of the standard, 3 R's. And I think that's another area. So I really sort of appreciated that side of it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that. And just to pile on that for a second, I mean, that there's an example of what can we do for free. So
yes.
if I'm a 4th grade science teacher and I'm already teaching about the digestive system, then we can talk about micronutrients and macronutrients and where they come from and the value of a plant-based diet and why, heavy processing diminishes the micronutrients and the macronutrients that are available in food. Those are all well within the realm of the topics that are covered or can be covered. And we have all kinds of public school science teachers who've said, oh yeah, I'm going to incorporate nutrition lessons or health concepts into what I'm already teaching. That kind of decision can get made at a school level. It doesn't need to come from the federal government.
Right. Yeah. How, where catch is involved, how are you guys adapting PE and health education to the COVID era? What can you just talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah.
And also how this might change how you're teaching after the COVID era. If there's any.
Great question. Well, there's a couple things. Rahm Emanuel said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And we've really tried to see the positive side of the COVID crisis for health education because, well, for one, we haven't talked about immune health much in this country, especially not for kids. It just hasn't been an issue in the last generation or two, right? Because of vaccinations and other public health campaigns. Kids' immune health is pretty good in this country until pretty recently, we started talking about COVID. So I think one conceptual adaptation that we've made is to really reinforce the overlap between physical health, mental health, and immune health. Exercise and plant-based diet are huge protective factors for your immune system. And they're also very, very important for your mental health. I mean, for those of us who run or work out, know endorphins are the best antidepressant going. And if you don't work out, then you feel it. So we've been able to, I think, help schools understand the connections between keeping kids active and well-fed and keeping them, immune healthy and mentally healthy, because there's been so many extra stressors on kids in terms of depression and anxiety and so on, and exercise and also tobacco avoidance, really help with the mindfulness. So those are some of the conceptual adaptations that we've made. As a practical matter, we had to start doing all of our training by Zoom. Overnight in March, we had to immediately start doing our training by Zoom, and we had to teach the teachers to do their work by Zoom. So there was a format change from our perspective and, a content change in the sense of what we were teaching them to do. So we had to understand and get good at, distance learning, how to do PE and distance learning. We had to create a lot more of kind of self-serve content, including videos and stuff like that, because that's what teachers needed. And frankly, that's what parents needed. I mean, just a 15-minute video, that's something their kids could do for a parent of an elementary school student, last spring and fall when you just didn't even have time to go to the bathroom. So that was all, very helpful. And I think that, one of the things we were able to show schools is it is definitely feasible to keep kids active. It's different kinds of activities. They're going to be home-based, but you don't have to have a gym and balls to be active. So, what can we do? What kinds of activities can we do? And also the other, I guess, silver lining is getting parents a little bit more involved in having to not only show, but in some cases participate in that physical education. You know, we had some videos, for example, on, you know, doing yoga with your kids that were hugely popular. And that's something that I don't know if before COVID there was as big of an audience for that. We've certainly seen a lot more, you know, parents, you know, literally getting down and dirty with that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So Duncan, today, what is the appreciation and teaching of health for those who have a degree in education? Meaning, is it part of what they are learning when they are, and I know you come from a different background, you come from the policies for public health background, but for people who are going to go into the schools, are they receiving today information on the importance of health to learning and kind of, are they embodying this, and are you engaging that audience at all?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think there are. Let me answer it in a couple ways. So, one thing that I think is happening is more and more educators are becoming sensitive to the concept of the whole child, seeing that schools' jobs can't be to just create academic robots without any regard for the safety, the emotional well-being, the physical well-being, and so on of kids, because childhood, especially in some communities, can be very traumatic. And if you're ignoring all those human factors, you're just not going to be as successful in educating kids. So one of the things I point out in some of the research I did for my book included identifying that the phrase whole child has gained tremendous currency among educators. If you look at the top 10 school districts by size in the country, 5 of them now use the phrase whole child, those 2 words together, in either their mission statement or strategic plan. I mean, some school districts literally have a motto like educating the whole child or something like that. It's become a very, very important educational word, a phrase. So I think that is happening, and I think that when it comes to essentially the latest K-12 educational theory, that there's a lot of more and more people are subscribing to the concept of whole child at a leadership level. Unfortunately, where I think the gap is, and again, part of the reason I wrote the book is that there's no real sense of, well, how? I mean, you can't just teachers are very practical people. They have things to do and schedules, and they, you know, there's a plan. There's a reason that the word lesson plan exists. You don't just go in there and do a lesson. You have a plan. And so who is doing the translation between the concept and the philosophy of whole child and telling teachers what they should do tomorrow morning? The answer is, as far as I can tell, nobody. Nobody's really taking that concept and making it applicable in the classroom for the general educator or for the principal. And so I think there's a big gap still. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, I've been working with professors of education and trying to see if they are interested in using my book, and some of them are, as part of what they teach, of the how, if you will. So, you know, okay, we believe in whole child. That's great. It can help us as educators. Now, what does that actually mean? How do we do it? And I think that there still is a gap in training educators, general educators, on those things. It tends to be the province of the PE teacher. And so a lot of this pedagogy right now is in schools of public health, kinesiology, physical education, nutrition, those types of disciplines. And it needs to get into general schools of education.
Okay, yeah. Who, besides that, who do you see as the audience for this book?
Well, the way I look at it is there's you know, the audience for the book is educators, and there's 3 kinds of educators. The first kind of educator is the health educator, and that's the choir. And you know, we've gotten a great reception from the choir because we're saying things. This book is saying things that they believe, but also adding some additional detail, ammunition that they can use in making their case, and some practical tips that they can use. So that, I think, is I always felt from the beginning that was going to be the easiest audience to reach. The second kind of educator is the full-time general educator. So these are the type of people that we've just been talking about, people who are classroom teachers, whether it's science teacher, math teacher, their principals. Most principals have been classroom teachers. In fact, in Texas, there's a law that you cannot become a principal until you've been a classroom teacher. And then there's superintendents or other administrative staff that work in the district, curriculum developers, people, et cetera. And that general audience is, again, I think we're really getting to them through the concept of health is something that can just help you do your job. You might think that your job is to be in the business of teaching math, but if you're not also in the business of stress relief and building whole children, they're never going to do good math. And then the third kind of educator is parents, right? We're all in it part-time. Sometimes it seems like a lot more than that. And by the way, there's a lot of us. There's 50 million educators, K-12 educators in the country, if you include parents as, who are part-time educators, 50 million. Yeah. And there's another 50 million K-12 kids. So that's 100 million people, which is a third of the country, in one way or another, is in the K-12 system. It's an awful lot of people. And we're going to keep going until we sell 100 million copies.
Yeah, and I think that, that third point, the parents, I mean, we've become very close to the education system since last March. And, I think that we can probably see, we experience it every day. If your child doesn't have that sort of health stool, leg of the stool, it's going to be a lot harder for them to get a lot out of the Zoom classes, which are hard enough already, to absorb. And then you put some of these other barriers in. So we've had some questions come in. If anyone wants to ask any additional questions, please use the chat or the Q&A feature. And let me ask you this one question, very interesting one. So, one free opportunity for schools to improve their high school students' physical, mental, and academic health is to delay their school start times. So what are your thoughts around that delaying of school start times? I think that California has noted, this person's noted that California is already doing that. What are your thoughts? It's a topic in my family, getting enough sleep, all of us, but especially the kids in terms of learning. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think that the concept that sleep hygiene is an important part of health, I agree with 1,000%. And actually, that's another benefit of physical activity is sleep hygiene. Kids sleep better when they're getting a sufficient, aerobic dose of exercise. So that's, in fact, we've talked about having a sleep hygiene program within Catch. We always try to have you incorporate the word catch into our programs. We have our vaping prevention program is Catch My Breath. We have an oral health program coming out called Catch Healthy Smiles. And we've speculated that maybe, Catch Some Z's would be a good name for our sleep hygiene program. So I think it's an important issue. I think it's interrelated to the other physical health and mental health and immune health issues that we've discussed. There's also a tremendous amount of research that's coming out that poor sleep is a real problem for the immune system. I mean, it may actually even be one of the contributors to obesity as well.
And and help me out here, I thought the science was also, and this is part of this question, I think the science is suggesting that as you get older, that delayed start time, your clock is sort of changing for these, especially for these sort of teens, in high school. And that,
that's right.
Delayed start time has some real benefit there.
That's right. And that was kind of the second part of the thing is I think what I'd like to see first and foremost is an emphasis on sleep hygiene and teaching what that is and how you get it and making sure that students are getting proper sleep. And then I think as an extension of that, yes, if delaying start times can help with sleep hygiene, it should be part of the package. I just don't think, I would like to see delayed start times as being one element of prioritizing sleep hygiene, and not as a solution in isolation, because if we're not teaching kids about the importance of sleep, if we're not prioritizing, physical activity or other things that help them sleep well, then we're going to be chasing our tails because we're going to be starting later, but we're still going to be tired. Yeah. So I think we have to do it all.
Okay. We had another question. How are you marketing this book? How are you getting the word out there? I think, always interesting to understand.
Yeah, well, I'm learning a lot more about book marketing than I ever thought I would. So a couple things. So first of all, I mentioned these different audiences. It's very hard to reach the big mass market audience with a kind of do-it-yourself, self-published deal. So I'm not trying to do that on a large scale. What we are doing is, well, first of all, we're marketing it through the Catch Global Foundation, and Catch has been very, very supportive, and we have a lot of the folks in the first two circles, especially the first circle, among our audience, and they've been very receptive to it. And then the other thing that I'm doing, and probably I would say that my most successful strategy to date, has been marketing it to professors of public health and these related disciplines, exercise science, nutrition, and professors of education. And so I have gotten it on the syllabus in 5 universities now for the spring, which is awesome. And yeah, and my goal's 10, so I'm halfway there. And but most of all, I just want to blow the goal away. I've got and some of those include the University of Texas, Wright State University, Montclair State University, if anyone's in New Jersey, actually the University of Alberta in Canada, so one outside the U.S., and it's being looked at at UMass Boston, Michigan, Rice. There's what I found is that the materials for teaching school health are pretty outdated and dry. And this book seems to fill a gap, partly because it's very practical, and it's got some color in it. Not literally, they told me it was way too expensive to publish a colored book, but it's got pictures and graphs and stuff like that that lighten things up. So, for anyone who's read the book or who's interested in reading the book, you'll see that I talk about a theory called diffusion of innovations, which is very, very helpful in this kind of work, because what diffusion of innovations basically says is you don't just get an idea out there. You have to be very systematic in finding early adopters of that idea. Yeah. That's how we advise parents and teachers to look at how do we get our school interested in health, find the early adopters. And so I'm trying to do the same thing with my book. And I think a lot of times innovators and early adopters, they're found among the ranks of academics, researchers, and they're also found among the ranks of young people. If we can get young people, who are future educators and health people, reading this and assimilating it and realizing, to be successful as an educator, I have to make sure my school is teaching health, then another generation or two, those people are going to be the ones that are the principals and the superintendents and running the schools. So let's get these ideas in the minds of the ambitious young people who are our future leaders, and they'll make sure it lives on. It's going to be really hard to change the minds of people who are 58 years old and 2 years from retirement.
Another really interesting question. Let me just go there. So someone's asking, putting this in an international context, we're so poor, we're down there with countries in civil war in terms of our HAIL index. Have you looked at what some of the other successful countries are doing well that we're not? Are there any learnings that you found there, or is that for another, for another day?
I think that is an interesting question, and I didn't, this in the scope of my research, I was not able to get super deep into a lot of what other schools are doing in their systems. But what I will say is the general kind of attitude it's very culturally driven. The general attitude in a lot of schools in Europe is to make more time for healthy activities. There's a lot more kind of general priority that's placed on this. On the other hand, their system is also like ours, very test-based, very rigorous academically, and I think that they share a perception that health is kind of something that schools don't have time for. And that I think is a real tragedy, because that's basically saying is we're going to assume that kids are learning health elsewhere, like at home. And sure, if you have a great culture of health and you're able to go out and exercise with your kids and you're able to really help them build healthy habits, that's great. But if you don't, if every single family doesn't have that, then you're not going to get every single kid to learn that. And that's what schools are for. Schools are for making sure that we all have a baseline of knowledge about the things that are going to be important to our lives. And I think, one of the reasons that the U.S., if you look at, where the U.S. ranks in that healthy average life expectancy, we are basically right at the average between first world country conditions, or so-called, let's call them high income country conditions, and low income country conditions. We're right in the middle. Why is that? Well, the reason is because the United States is a mixture of high income communities and low income communities. And the disparity is huge. And we do a lot of our work with Catch in low income communities. And if we're going to do this anywhere, that's where we should be doing it, because those kids, sadly, they really aren't getting it at home. And I've been thinking about this problem and working on this problem for a while, and I've come to the very strong conclusion that if the schools don't do it, nobody will. The schools are the only place that you can come even close to a population-wide approach.
Yeah, that's why was it Ortiz Elementary?
Yeah.
That's why that is so amazing to me, because you mentioned the income levels there, and yet they're off the charts in terms of attainment and achievement. So that was terrific to see. Tom, I don't know if you can rejoin us. Don't know if you're there or not, but we did have, if you are, we did have the question come in. What is, how do you, with your SYA educator hat on, think about this issue within the SYA program? Don't know if you can, I see you're muted there, Tom, but I think we got you. Perhaps not.
Tom,
okay.
I think Tom's muted,
Yeah, I think Tom's muted. Okay, well, I want to thank you for this. I believe we also, and Duncan, you have to help me out here. I believe you also are going to be providing one of our attendees with a signed copy of the book.
I am. So I think that Jen is going to do the drawing.
Okay, I think I see Jen there. Okay, Jen has done the drawing, and our winner is David Nagel. So David, we're on a webinar, so we can't see you jumping around your living room, which I'm sure you are right now with your signed hard copy book on the way. But you are a winner, and I just want to thank everyone for attending. I want to thank SYA for asking me to moderate this, because not only has it been great to get to know Duncan through this, but I really enjoyed the book, and it is such an important topic, as I mentioned, through my work on the board with Kids on Point, which is right in the audience that David is referring to, and with my own family. I just think it's a terrific topic, and one that we don't spend enough time on. So thank you all for attending, and we hope you will join us for a future webinar. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk with everybody. I put my email in the chat box. Feel free to contact me with any questions. Jack, I got your contact information, and I look forward to talking offline, and David will get you that book in the mail tomorrow.